Hi all, in this lecture we are going to go over the joints classification according to the function and structure. Joints are unions or junctions between two or more bonds. So they are also called articulations. They hold the skeleton together and are important for mobility. There are about 400 joints in our body. Joints exhibit a variety of forms and functions in our body. So according to the structure, they are classified into fibrous joints, cartilaginous joints, and synovial joints. According to their function, they are classified into amphiarthrosis, synarthrosis, and diarthrosis joints. So amphiarthrosis are slightly movable joints, example the vertebral joints. Synarthrosis are immovable joints, example the joints in your skull. Diarthrosis are freely movable joints such as the ball and socket joints, hip joints, and shoulder joints. Let's talk about your fibrous joints. These joints are called fixed or immovable joints because they do not move. Fibrous joints have no cavity and are connected via fibrous connective tissues. The type of fibrous joints are sutures, syndesmosis, and gomphosis. Sutures are the connections between your skull. Then syndesmosis are joints found between parallel bonds such as the tibia and fibula. Gomphosis joint, it anchors the root of a tooth into its bony socket within the maxillary bone or mandible bone of the skull. It is also known as peg in socket fibrous joint. Next is your cartilaginous joints. Cartilaginous joints are connected entirely by cartilage, for example, fibrocartilage or hyaline cartilage. This joint allows more movement between bonds than a fibrous joint. Two types of cartilaginous joints are primary and secondary. Primary cartilaginous joint are synchondrosis, meaning it is almost an immovable joint. So these are connected by a hyaline cartilage. Example is the first sternocostal joint between first rib and the manubrium. Then secondary cartilaginous joints are symphysis. It means they are slightly movable and are united by fibrocartilaginous fusion between two bonds. Example are joints between the bodies of the vertebrae. The last classification is the synovial joint or diarthrodial joints. Synovial joints permit a great degree of free movement and are classified according to the shape of articulation and the type of movements into plane, hinge, pivot, condylar, saddle, and ball and socket joints. Synovial joints are named so because they are lubricated by a fluid called synovial fluid, which is contained within the synovial capsule that surrounds the all joint. The surfaces of the bonds that meet up in a joint that are lined by a special kind of cartilage called the articular cartilage, which is composed of hyaline cartilage. They are avascular, that means there is no blood supply. First is your gliding or plane joint. This kind of joint consists of two flat surfaces of about equal size that slide against one another. For example, a process from the scapula can rub against the process of the clavicle to make a gliding joint. Next is a hinge joint. Hinge joint resembles door hinges and allows only flexion and extension. It occurs in elbow, ankle, and interphalangeal joints. Then pivot joint. Pivot joint is formed when a process from one bone is surrounded by a ring of another bone. For example, the second cervical vertebra, called the axis, has a long process called the dens that poke through the foramen of the first cervical vertebra called the atlas. Now your condylar joints. Condylar joints are type of joints where the articular surface of one bone, it has an overt convexity, sitting within an ellipsoid cavity of the other bone. For example, the radiocarpal joints of the wrist, metacarpophalangeal joints of the hand, and metatarsophalangeal joints of the foot. Now let's take a look at the saddle joint. Saddle joint is composed of two saddle-shaped bones that are oriented perpendicular to one another. This joint provides a large range of motion. Then this joint is the one that joins your thumb's carpal to its metacarpal, called the carpometacarpal joint, and between the femur and the patella. You can see here in our example, it looks like a rider sitting in a saddle. The last one is the ball and socket joints. Ball and socket joints are formed by the attachment of a globular head into a cup-shaped cavity. It allows movement in many directions. You can see the ball and socket joints in your shoulder and hip joints.